Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second SEAspotlight Talk. Thank you for joining us at Focus today. My name is Berny Tan. I'm curator of the new design collection initiative at Singapore Art Museum, as well as an artist. I will be moderating today's talk titled Making in a Material World, a discussion with artists Sinta Tantra, Tiffany Loy and Ain. They will share insights on their approaches and relationship with specific materials from gold leaf to textile to ceramics in their practices. And they will also speak to how scale, technique, place can affect the meanings associated with these materials that they employ. So now I would like to invite Ain, Tiffany, and Sinta in their order to briefly introduce their practices and the works that they are showing here at Focus before our discussion. And do note that in the interest of time, we will not be taking questions from the audience, but you are free to approach the speakers after the talk has ended. So I will pass it on to Ain right now. Yeah, thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Ain. Oh. Sorry. Hi everyone, my name is Ain. So could you go next, please? So I'm the artist today. So this is my work being presented at the back room over there, and I'm actually Malaysian, but I was studying in the Netherlands. So I used to be based in the Netherlands. Now I came back to be based in Putrajaya, Malaysia. If you go next. Yeah. So this is just a brief Venn diagram to kind of how do I describe it? Visualize and um, make an image out of what my practices, artistic practices. So I actually called all of my artistic practice called relearning workshop, because basically on one diagram I actually relearned the traditional craft of Malaysia, because even though I'm Malaysian myself, I've been living abroad for most of my life. So I realized that I lack this knowledge of traditional craftings and all my national history in terms of craft. And then on this side, it's basically like the personal experiences where I actually explore a lot of oral stories. And oral stories is actually one of the main cores or main core for my artistic practice. And then in the middle is basically translating, materializing, and visualizing into artworks. So in a sense, I don't really have a specific work that or specific medium that I work with. I tend to really look around first and experiment with a lot of things and trying to find the most suitable material to tell the oral stories or the stories of my family and my history of my own family. If you go next. So this is the kind of like studio space. Well, not really studio space. It's actually my backyard, because I don't really have a studio space, a big one. It's more small, and I actually at some point in my practice, this is one of them, I actually wanted to make clay out of scratch. So I actually, because I felt like I need to add a sense of meaning into the clay. So I actually dug the backyard of my house, and then I literally made clay for like 3 weeks, trying to kind of experiment, trying to find the right materials and sifting it. And I also fired them myself with the barbecue grill, because it's my handmade kiln that was available at the time. And if you go next page, and this is currently the work that I'm working at. As you can see, I'm not only in ceramics, but I'm also exploring other materials too. These are the ash painting series, because from my process where I make my own ceramics, I actually got a lot of ash, and I felt like it had something to. It was just telling me it feel like it need to be used to tell a story. So I actually use these ash and mix it with pigment to make these paintings, which I'm currently working on. And yeah, that's me.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Tiffany.
Hello. So I'm a Singaporean artist. I'm based here. This is my studio space. It looks a lot bigger here, but it's actually quite small. It's where I do all my weaving, yarn dyeing, all my experiments. Next. Yeah. I used to describe my medium as textile or fiber, but I realized that these are quite loaded words. Like, people do tend to associate fiber with female work or certain ideas related to politics or histories. While I appreciate that, I feel like because of my education and in influences from the West, I feel my work is mainly abstract. And I call my medium these days the pliable line, which is a lot more culturally neutral or culturally fluid. And I consider myself someone who uses the line to build forms, using my weaverly way of thinking to build non-woven forms. Yeah. Scale is something very, very significant in my work. I think weavers are very good with their eyes because we always need to see something very, very, it's like just looking at things through a counting glass. And I feel that's something that I have reapplied into the practice of making sculpture, to play with visual resolution and what our eyes are able to take up, and tangentially explore how the eyes can be deceived in some ways as well. I find visual trickery actually a lot more scientific than trivial. This is a rotated image of the piece that I'm showing there. I did rotate it intentionally. And a lot of my work is surprising to me as well. I feel like that there's a difference between the way someone that's trained in weaving would go about creating a piece from someone that's trained in perhaps painting or sculpture, because when you're holding on to a brush or when you're manipulating something directly, you see what you're doing, and as you are making those changes, you are aware exactly what you're doing. But for a weaver or someone who takes the approach of a weaver, you are not thinking directly of the outcome, but you're thinking about the algorithm or the process, the structure. And then whatever the outcome is, it is the result of your rules. So I see myself as a how kind of person more than a what. And I think that reflects on the work. And because I'm trained in weaving, I think color and structure is a sort of evergreen theme in my work. Almost everything is about the relationship between color and structure. And you may imagine that, like in painting, you would try to suggest depth using light and color and shadow. But for a weaver, there's this strange other dimension that is construct. So colors do give you clues on how something is constructed. It can also cheat you because it can manipulate the way that you see 3D forms. Yes. So as I've mentioned before, a lot of my work is about visual resolution. So I do work with a variety of threads, a variety of materials, and some of them are extremely, extremely thin. And I do see myself as someone who create works that are not necessarily carrying specific grand messages, but my works are like exercises for the eyes. They give your eyes a chance to sort of really, be strained and be challenged. So in works like that, Volatile Impressions, it's about the unreliability of our eyes and our brain. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Sinta.
Hi, everybody. Maybe I'll start off with the images of the bridge. Do we have them? Yes, okay. So my name's Sinta Tantra. I'm an artist based in between London and Bali. A bit about my background. My family's Balinese. I was born in New York, and then we moved to London when I was about 5 or 6, hence the very English accent. I describe myself as a painter, but a painter working on an architectural scale. So the heart of my work actually started off in public art and doing things like this, which is mural. This is a piece in London. It's in an area called Canary Wharf, which is the financial district. And for me, I was always so keen in making work outside of the gallery space, using paints, using industrial materials. If any of you know paints, decorating your homes, for example, you would often need color codes. So I just kind of love the conversation of color and how color could often be very subjective because it's your interpretation of color, but it could also be very objective because it's indexed with like numbers and codes. Next slide, please. I moved, I think from the public art, I also developed a painting practice. So painting on linen, on, I guess straightforward canvases with four sides. So me, this was interesting because making work in the studio and painting it myself rather than getting other people to paint it enabled me to have like quite an intimate experience and physically being kind of more connected to the material. And as an artist, I think it's that physical connection with that material that makes us think and reflect and wonder. And, we talk about scale, but I think there's also scale in time. So time in the studio somehow gets expanded because you're so into the materials that you're working with, and you almost, you go into the zone. This particular work here is made from gold leaf. I love the materiality of gold. I've actually got this gentleman here in the pink t-shirt, some gold leaf. So I thought you could pick it up and pass it around. And it's just because, we're talking about materials. So I think it's quite interesting to, for you to get a sense of what gold feels like. It's a very difficult material to work with. You have to breathe in a certain way. It sort of lifts off very easily. I mean, this is going to be an interesting experiment to see how long it will last as a sheet. But I love the universal appeal of gold. It translates as something beautiful, decorative, but also powerful, and it's something that people have had a connection with over the ages. So I love that aspect of gold. Next slide. And this is my work in the studio. These are kind of wooden panels, shaped wooden panels I'm currently working on. This is a new thing for me, so kind of breaking away from the rectangular canvas, getting away from the four-sided, and this is something kind of in the middle of like the public art mural and the painting. So this is linen stretched over cut wood, and I don't know, I think weirdly enough I naturally gravitate towards a larger scale. And then I think the lessons I've learned in public art, going back into the studio is a very interesting one for me. So I don't think I'd be able to do this work if it wasn't, if I wasn't able to do the public art stuff and working things on a big scale. I work in between the computer, the hand-drawn, the making. Sometimes I work with other people. So in some ways, like the project management of it has also become part of my practice. I guess when you're working with public art, you have to be a bit of a people person and somehow negotiate your way to get everyone to be on your side. So I think kind of, I'll end it there, thanks.
Do you need to add on any more? Do you
no,
want to
that's okay.
talk a little?
Oh,
Well,
pieces.
I can go into, maybe just quick one about the pieces that are in C-Focus, and then we can go into the discussion.
Okay, so the pieces that I'm showing in C-Focus, I guess I've called them curatorial pairings. So the whole exhibition here, we are supposed to be responding to past and present. And for our presentation, I think we want to do that quite literally. So we paired the artist Berny with my work. I don't know if any of you know about Berny. She's quite a well-known Balinese female painter. We're a generation apart. She was born in 1966, died in 2006. She's getting a lot of interest at the moment, mainly because I think her history, her story, her works were, I think there was interest, but there's now been a resurgence and a kind of re-looking at female artists of the past. And I guess people are looking at her work with fresh eyes in this day and age. A lot of people focus on her history, her personal history, which is quite traumatic, filled with trauma, sexual abuse. And I think what I wanted, not to get away from that, but I think I was thinking about what it would have been like if I had a conversation with her in the studio. So she's sort of been living in my head as I was making these works. The gallery had 10 panels, 10 Berny panels to choose from. I selected 3, and from those 3, I made a response in relationship to her work. Formally, I think we have an interest in color. Her colors are quite pastel-y, they're quite light. Even though people talk about her trauma, the works are quite quite yummy in their colors. You know, they are quite feminine. There's a light touch to them. There's a translucency to how she uses her paints. And there's humor. I mean, that's kind of, I think that's what's so incredible about them. She's able to kind of marry these things together. But I think formally, what I really love about them is that quite often in a lot of her paintings, there's metamorphosizing of bodies, or twists, or pivots, as I call them. So if we go back to, is it the pink? Do I have the pink one here? No. Yes, this one. So with the blue one, I kind of see as where the toe meets the shoe, that's kind of a pivot. But in most of her other works, you could see these forms of an object turning into something else and changing. And I think that kind of relates to maybe a particular type of, I don't know, in Berny's histories and oral histories, we talk about things changing into something else, into other beings.
Okay, thank you to all the artists for sharing a little bit about their work here at SEAfocus and also their practices. So what I'll do next is I'll ask each of the artists more specific questions. Oops, sorry. And then the other artists also welcome to respond to kind of the underlying principles of those questions. So we'll start with Ain. I want to go back to your piece that's actually in the show. Hold on. Okay. So as you mentioned, you don't really restrict yourself to one material or medium. So even with something like the Chiplak retellings, I think you can also tell us a little bit more about the context of it. It's actually you're redoing something that you've done before in terracotta, but this time you're doing it in air dry clay. So I think if you could walk us through the context for that, as well as like how it feels like to kind of change mediums and kind of relearn or learn about new mediums as you kind of move from work to work.
So this artwork is actually, it stemmed as a response to one of my works, because I actually made a similar work in the Netherlands, and it's actually in terracotta instead. It's actual clay, it's in brown in color, but those works in the Netherlands was actually acquired and gained by the Museum of Immigration Phoenix in Rotterdam, and it's actually a response to how much people have come up to me and actually wanting to buy individual ceramics to have it at their home, because when I tell them, because a part of the work is actually me telling them the oral stories of each of these platforms, because each of platforms has its own stories, because I was looking into how to kind of, not alternative, but additional ways of archiving our oral stories, because if you textualize it, it kind of finalizes that oral stories that always evolves in nature. So I wanted to find additional ways to archive it, and one of it was ceramics. Of course, there's also textile, but I wanted to explore ceramics more, like Pasu Labu Sayang was one of the Malaysian craft that I was looking into it. And I was basically trying to kind of translate that oral stories into the material and trying to kind of imagine how these oral stories would feel or would be looking like. So then each of them have their own stories. And people, when they come up to me and then they ask the stories, they feel a sense of relation to it, because they're somehow that, oh, my grandfather was also a postman too, but then this man is actually Dutch. He's somewhere else from nowhere near me. So then there's a sense of relation, and people started having this desire of wanting the artwork. They want to buy it, and for me, I couldn't sell them one by one individually, because I felt like it was more suitable that these artwork are meant to be sold together, because they're kind of like a part of a family, because they're also like oral story families. Because of that, I had this kind of response to what made people really, really want things. And then I kind of got this idea of Chiplak, because Chiplak in Malay, which means like, how do I describe it? Say, copied of authentic goods. So then they basically, for example, like Adidas, the copied version would be like Abibas or something like that, right? So these are basically called Chiplaks. And I basically wanted to kind of like, what happens if I make a repetition of my work and just kind of like make it so like cheap, fast produce, cheap clay, air dry clay, nothing too much of a care. So then I did it, and I just want to, as a like a response to how people desire things that they want because of the authenticity. And it kind of questions the authentic of these oral stories now. Who actually owns these oral stories? Is it me? Is it the museum over there? Or, yeah, that's the kind of idea behind it. And these ceramics, if one buys, I will always replace it again and again and again, because it's unlimited, just like how cheap blocks are. They're always fast produced, unlimited, and yes. And then your question was the material, right? Okay, so in terms of the material, like, I don't necessarily stick to one material. I like to explore a lot of materials because it is really based on my oral stories. Sometimes some things, I try to kind of research a lot about what the additional narratives that can be made using materials. So currently I'm actually looking at ash as a leftover product from my ceramics from this firing. And when I was looking at the ash, I really like that temporal, ephemeral material of it, because when I make these paintings, over time they change color, and over time they also disintegrate, which is kind of similar to that fragility of ceramics, where the ceramics itself is fragile, yet the oral story is also fragile and always evolving and always changing. So that's the kind of way of my practice. I don't limit myself to one material. I really explore a lot of things, and a lot of coincidences are also a part of my practice. I hope that answers.
Do the other artists have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just really interested in this idea of reproducing. And obviously, when you're making fakes, I think we sort of discussed it earlier on, like when we were making fakes, they're made quite quickly with a machine, like screen printing, for example. The process of this is quite slow when crafted, and I'm just wondering how you feel about the length of time remaking it, and does it seem quite sort of torturous in a way, because you're going to have to do this for eternity?
In terms of remaking it, because usually cheap like in the real life, they're factory manufactured, but for this, it's like I am the factory myself, and it's quite like ironic but also odd, because I'm the owner of the authentic goods, but I'm also like making the cheap version, so I'm factorizing my own work. It has actually gotten to a point where I became really fast with it, because I was looking at ceramics for like almost 2 years, so I've got the skills for it. But then when I was making it, I could finish it in 1 hour. Like the card, I could finish it in 1 hour. But then this process and like the tediousness of it, it slowly got into me like, I'm so tired of this. And then I wonder, how does it feel like the factory worker is always doing the same thing and again and again? And then it also made me question about the stories, the oral stories itself, like, wow, I'm getting so tired. But yes, how I felt about making it, so.
Hopefully lead to something else, or hopefully it'll lead to another kind of thinking.
Do you regret making it unlimited?
No, I don't actually. I actually think that's also like the part of it, the fact that I'm tired. I mean, it's sad to say that I'm tired, but I think it's also like, that's also the reality of it. And I think it's in a sense like I should embrace that this is the reality of the truth of reproduction and manufacturing of it, the labor cost that comes with making art, and also our everyday life objects.
I think what you talked about previously, where you said that the oral histories are really what anchor your work, and I think we're used to thinking very conventionally about physical mediums, that painting is your medium, or sculpture is your medium, or clay, or textile, or so on. But I think this leads into my question for Tiffany, which is that, like you said just now, there's like a physical medium to your work, which is textile, and slowly, progressively becoming kind of a bit more ambiguous. But then also, I think you think of your medium also in the intangible sense, which is like the line, or the pliable line, or how the pliable line exists in space. So I think if you could expand a little bit more about this sort of intangible medium and how you like negotiate materiality. Yeah.
Okay, there's actually a lot to unpack. I feel that by making the work more abstract and less tied to actual material or stories, it is in fact more accessible because it's culturally fluid. It's whatever you say it is, and I feel quite strongly about that, and more strongly about that now because I've shown in Singapore for quite a bit, and I do like to talk to the people who visit the shows and ask me questions, and I do take note of what they say and do enjoy the conversations. And quite often people would ask me, what is this? Yeah, and I am immediately interested because I would ask them, what do you think it is? And it's really interesting for me because then it becomes a two-way thing where I hear what they think it is, and I try not to tell them what I think it is or I mean for it to be immediately, so that I can also benefit from this exchange. The whole process to conceiving and making the pieces is extremely mathematical and logical. I think that's just the way I am, but also maybe a product of Singapore science stream education. So I grew up in a time where you can choose your so-called specialism, and I chose like a triple science and one humanities plus art. And I think it really does reflect, it does show in the way I see the world and the way I make sense of the world and the things that I need to function. So I see them as very mathematical and physical, but it's so interesting to hear people ascribe their own meanings into the work. People tend to talk about textile-based work as something feminine, but just the other day I met a visitor who told me that he comes from a family of rope makers, and he immediately saw these things as masculine. And I was so happy to hear that because I'm like, oh great, finally, something that tips the scale. And I can also start to use this example as a counterbalance to the feminine craft. I suppose craft is another thing to unpack as well, but we don't have time for that today. But yes, generally, I enjoy the fluidity of something quite ambiguous.
I think, I guess there's a kind of flexibility when you are focused on trying to create or trying to explore something that's more abstract and that it can move between your different mediums. I mean, you started off with things that were very so-called surface-based, and then you're slowly moving into things that are like kind of lines existing on their own, which are the ones that are actually in this show as well. I think speaking about kind of gendered associations with mediums, I think that all of you are working with mediums that have very loaded kind of historical, cultural, even religious associations, and I think this moves on also to Sinta's use of tempera and gold leaf. And so if you could talk a little bit about how you fell in love with those mediums and what you enjoy about them, and like how you grapple or embrace all these associations.
Okay, thank you. So tempera paint, I use sort of like an acrylic version of tempera, not the egg tempera. So it's slightly different. What I love about tempera is like it has a very flat finish. You could perhaps see that more on the rectangular paintings and the shaped canvases, but I love how flat they are because you automatically become absorbed in the color, and for me that's like stepping into like a universe in itself, swimming in this color. It's quite tricky to use. You sort of need to execute it all in one go. So for example, if I make a mistake, I can't paint on top of it. The whole surface needs to be painted again, which makes it quite, I would say, a bit performative in the studio. There's a lot of pre-preparation, I would say, in my paintings compared to most other painters who perhaps face the canvas and attack it. I have a plan, I know what I'm doing, and then I execute it, which perhaps to some people might seem maybe a bit too linear, but what I love about it, it means that when I'm in the studio, when I'm faced with the material, I just execute it and my mind is pure. And I love the purity of that because I think it makes, for me, I think it makes the painting fresh and it makes it not too fussy. I kind of want the material to be the material. And even though I've manipulated or made this decorative shape or whatever, I want the material to sing. And for me, it's the same with gold. It's a very tricky material. I think you've passed it around amongst yourselves, and you even have to breathe in a certain way. So when I was learning how to do gold leafing, I had learned from a gilder, master gilder, who used to go to the pub to get a pint of Guinness in order to relax before he did the gilding. So I think this idea of needing to be in a certain state before you execute the day, the painting. I mean, I have quite a ritualistic practice when I do make work. Tend to do yoga, meditate, and then execute. And then I have sort of, I don't know, things are kind of organized in time. But I try not to kind of have too much labored. The labor is in the kind of conceptualizing the shape and form and thinking, not the actual materials. I like the materials to be, I keep on using the word executed. I think what I'm trying to say is just a purity in it, yeah. And that's what I love about using these materials, but they are quite tricky sometimes.
And you, I think there's a long history of using gold leaf and tempera, and there are kind of associations that people might have with it. Perhaps less obvious when you move it into abstract spaces, but I mean, if you think about the long history of religious art, I think it's very present. Do you have, I think, how much does that factor into the way you use gold leaf?
The religious aspect or the...
Or like any kind of the historical associations with the material?
I mean, I think I love the fact that the history is already in the material, and I love how people bring their own cultural connections with it, and I'm open to people's associations with gold. I mean, that's why I started using color, because everyone... Well, hopefully, most people have a gut reactions color. They have a gut reaction to gold. I want people just to feel the painting. I want them to enjoy the material in the same way that I enjoy making them as well. I think that's the beauty. I think it kind of ties in with what you said, Tiffany, about the beauty of abstract work. Abstract work is a reflection not just of the artist, but of what you see in it. You know, sometimes, I think in particular when you do public work, because the work is outside of the gallery context, you have to be open about people's interpretations and what they see, and they could even say, well, it's not really art, but I kind of welcome that, and I think actually to be an artist, you need to be that open. You need to listen and learn, but also stand by your work. But yeah, I love the context and the history of these materials. Tempera, perhaps it's sort of quite Western. I think I was sort of drew to it mainly because it's its surface. It's really, really matte, and I think for me, with that abstraction, it allows the viewer to be completely absorbed in the color.
Thank you. Do you have the other artists have anything to add? But I think you brought up an interesting point about also the physicality and the mentality that goes into making in a studio. And when you have this kind of intimate relationship with material, I think that every artist has a different way of putting themselves in the zone when they enter a studio. So I wonder if both I and Tiffany could tell us a little bit more about how that relationship with the material kind of unfolds in the studio. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great element of physicality to these works that I'm showing here, because there's a lot of tension in the material, and I think that's such a great tension is sort of like a byproduct. Like it's not something that the artist it's not something that I like intentionally put in as a variable, but it's just that the material has its tension, and the more tightly I twist it or bind it, and the longer it is, the more I feel it. So it's this intense physicality of it that keeps me engaged, but it also tells me many things about the material that cannot be said. It's almost like a training and tested knowledge, like to be able to feel the amount of tension in the material and to like literally wrestle with it. I feel like it's so direct that you almost feel like the material becomes like a person that you get to know. And okay, if I'm allowed to go off tangent a little bit, since we're here, I forgot to say this, but it's so important. About visibility of color, I chose this image because I personally was a bit shocked after I've done the whole thing that my eyes fail to register the light and shadow of this part. These are exactly the same in structure, but it's so clear what's going on, like over and under here. But here, I'm just completely confused. And I remember telling someone about this, and they said, well, how is it possible for the artist to feel visually confused? I mean, you're the one making it, shouldn't you know? And I think that's because of my weaverly practice. I think when you're a weaver, you think in terms of systems and the rules for making. And then whatever comes out is actually something you had not expected. Yeah, so there's a certain lag time and a certain indirectness, like an intellectual indirectness, but a direct physicality to the process.
What hours do you work in the studio?
Long.
But do you need to start early, late at night?
Oh, I can start anytime. Like it feels so, it's such a long, drawn out and repetitive process that it just feels like if I have to choose what time, then I won't be able to finish. It's so sort of like, I don't know, it just becomes part of like an everyday thing, and a test of strength and mental concentration. I wouldn't use the word meditative. It's like a sport, actually. It's like a sport.
So, Sinta, what hours do you work? Because you also have studio assistants that help you, so they have.
I mean, most of the time
hours,
it feels like a sorority house, really. Organising our day to lunches and teas and cakes. I need the light. I need the daylight to look at the colours. I don't know, like the UK in winter, it's very sad. It gets dark at about 4 p.m. Yeah, electrical lights don't really do it. I remember having a studio when I got a residency in Rome, and obviously the light in Bali is amazing. But yeah, I think light is really important, so daylight hours really. But you know, there are periods where I'm working on the computer. So when I am painting, I need to go do my meditation, yoga, and then execute the painting. But when I'm on the computer, you know, it could also go on. You know, they're sort of different gears, as it were.
How about you, Ain? Because you have a job.
So it's a bit hard for me to like work full time as an artist, but usually I actually really prefer working at night, especially when I'm making the ceramics, because I think that darkness and that quietness of the time with the just one light of me just focusing on it, when I make the work, I actually slowly remember the story. So in my head, this is the kind of like, if you do meditation, but I don't do meditation, or I don't think it's a sport. For me, I think it's like more of a moment for me just to kind of, in my head, just remembering the story. As I'm making it, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, this is about that time when my grandfather did, and so on and so forth. So it's more of like a conversation that I have with the material as I'm making it. And I actually like prefer the nighttime, not just because of my job, I have a full-time day job, but then it's also that quietness and that serene moment of the darkness, and it's just you working at that moment. It kind of elevates that feeling. But of course, when I have to fire them, I have to start in the morning. So then I have to, because firing them for these ceramics would take around 12 hours if you're doing on your own. So I have to first make the fire, like prepare the whole thing, make sure everything is dry, nothing is wet because it will get damaged and break during firing. Then after that, I have to build the fire myself because my parents weren't going to help me, or no one's going to help me anyway. So then I have to keep the fire going. That would take like 1 hour to make the fire. Then I add more charcoal, more charcoal. Then I have to do like two ways of firing it. So first I have to do one above it, so then it gets heated up to a brown color. Then after, for like, that would happen around 3 hours in. That's already dark already. And then after that, I add even more charcoal, dig the charcoal around to put the ceramics into the charcoal. So then that would burn the whole night, and in total around 12 plus 1, so 13 hours. And there's always this unexpectedness of it breaking, because when you're trying to move it down, if you have shaky hands, you'll drop and break. So then for me, because I also have like hand tremors sometimes because it's just my nature, so I have to kind of breathe in, like, and then put it down very gently. And I think it's also like very related to how I work with fragile things. It reflects the attentiveness and the carefulness of trying to kind of keep these stories together and remembering them, even though they will change over time. So yeah, that's kind of like how I work.
So this actually technique of ceramics is different from putting ceramics into a kiln.
Yeah, in a kiln, it's actually electrical. So the heating part that heats the ceramics is electrical. Like, it depends on which kiln. There's the raku firing, which is a Japanese one where you dig a hole and you put charcoal in it. But so this is sort of similar to raku firing, or like where basically you use charcoal, and it really depends on which charcoal you use, because certain woods will give a different how do I say, like the burning effect of it, because they're not going to be consistent when you're firing them. There will be this really organic way of, like, some part might be too burned, some part might be like less burned. So it creates this kind of natural way of aesthetics, you would say. I don't really know how to describe it. So, but yes, so these are different. These are more the really like hands-on way, because I think for me, I prefer to start things from scratch. I think I just have this tendency to just kind of like, what happens if I really, really, really start from the very, very beginning of everything? Because oral story starts from the mouth and starts from the head. What if I also do that with my materials, really start from the backyard of my house and then put that into the material, the stories into it, and so on and so forth.
So I think this is, I think if you learned or if you encountered ceramics in a more kind of in a traditional educational or pedagogical environment, this is not the method that you would encounter. So I think this also brings up the question that I want to ask all three of you, which is like how you started even like engaging with the methodology or with the material that you are known for now. I guess we'll start with Ain, since we were just talking about it, and then we can move on to the both of you as well.
I think this way it started when I also, because the Venn diagram, if you look back to the Venn diagram, I had this like, it's a research one where it's like researching what the traditional crafting. So I chose one part, which is the pasu labu sayong, and I try to look my best to like the earliest way, like documentation of how Malaysian pasu labu sayong was made. And I found a video of like Finas that made like, they did a mini documentary about the pasu labu sayong and the history of it. And then that's when I saw that they used charcoal, they dug a big hole, and they would fire it for like 9 hours straight and build their own fire. So I really try to research the material and the history of the material in the context of Malaysia, because that's where I also focus on. I try to focus on Malaysian side to kind of keep it close to me, because the next part of the circle is the personal part where I put my family stories in it. And this is also like, just to kind of add on, it's kind of opposing that institutionalized of like archival narratives, because when you look at the National Archives, there's a certain narrative that is being given to the audiences and the people. There's a certain identity. But I kind of like, what about my grandma who's just a midwife? Why is she not a part of the archive? So that's kind of like my oppose to the universalism of archival. I want to also create an archive for these like little mundane, normal people or normal families of our own as a part of the artwork. So
So about textile-based, so fabric construction, I think an archaeologist or a historian may have a very interesting input on what I'm about to say, but I think as far as I know, different communities around the world have created their own version of textile. And even if you trace back really, really far in time, there are evidences of different communities around the world doing very similar things, but no evidence of them ever interacting. If you're a bit like woo-woo about it, you can consider aliens and other things, but like there's no proof to that. So, but what's interesting about that is that perhaps what is the common thread is logic. Like if every community is given a couple of thousand years to figure out something, perhaps they would all have the time to figure out the best way to go about something. And textile construction, mainly weaving, has been around for like 5,000 plus years, and the logic of it is still the same. So I think the common denominator is mathematics and logic. After all, the loom is the first computer, right? So what was the question again?
The question. So I think specifically to you, you were trained in industrial design.
Yes.
And then after that you went to Japan to learn weaving. So I guess, was there something that happened while you were in doing your undergrad in design, and then you were like, oh, actually textile has this kind of quality, I'm going to learn more about it? Or was it like something that's completely came from out of left field?
Yes, yes. So I was drawn to textiles, not because I was drawn to textiles, but I was drawn to weaving looms. The loom is such a beautiful, clever machine. It's the most genius thing I have come across, and being able to inherit the knowledge of using it is really quite a gift. So yes, first drawn to the loom, and then the fiber is really just like the byproduct. And it's a wealth of knowledge to continue.
But actually, you don't use the loom now
Yes.
for these works
Good
that are
point.
in C-Focus. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah, I do not use the loom, but I use a very weavely approach. So if you learn how to weave, your first like basic class will be called color and weave. And what color and weave is about is they'll make you weave the same weave structure. They'll make you weave it in all white. Then you weave in white, black, white, black, white, black. And then white, white, black, white, white, black. And you realize that the exact same structure appears completely differently when you have this change in color. And I realized that after I graduated from industrial design, so I thought I know about color and design, but discovering that was like a good slap in the face, right? Like, oh, there's so many things that I don't know, and these are such fundamental things. And until now, I still feel surprised, like when my eyes don't see the same thing as what I know. I find that so sort of philosophical as well. That I lost that train of thought again. What was your question?
Basically, it's just how you ended up working in textile. But then I asked you like why the loom doesn't appear anymore, if the loom was the reason why you got into textiles.
Yes, but it still appears because my brain functions like the loom now. Like I have these conditions in my mind, like how many plies, how do the colors interact. So I'm sort of applying a weaver's approach to a non-woven way of building. So it lives on.
Thank you. I think for Sinta, I think I want to
Wow.
like.
I want to go inside your brain. It's quite weaverly, isn't it?
Yeah. For Sinta, I want to add a different dimension, because you mentioned that you started off almost larger scale,
Yeah.
and then you moved back. So I think, like, how's your relationship with painting grown as that scale? Like you kind of toggle between all these different environments.
So I remember as a student, there was a lecture on minimalist painting, and there was an artist called Sullivan+Strumpf I don't know if any of you know him. He was an artist prominent in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, American artist. But he coined this phrase called conceptual painting, which means that painting doesn't just exist as the end product. The painting was also the kind of diagram you would make to go, the instructions that would go with the painting. So again, it's this idea of flattening painting and that it could be made and remade again in another place, another lifetime, and I just thought, wow, that's amazing. I think also the reason why I also want to do large-scale stuff, well, there are a couple of things. Practicalities. I think I didn't have much studio space when I was a young artist, so I made things on the computer. I didn't know how to use the computer at all. I had to learn. I don't know, we didn't have any computers in art school back then. We didn't, it was very traditional. So I had to learn how to use all the programs. I didn't know anything about architecture, had to learn as I went along. But for me, the passion was yes, I was kind of constricted in size, but not, with the computer and with using technology, you could actually expand those sizes to infinite. Another reason was probably a cultural thing. I think at art school I was, going to London, being Asian, being female, there was sort of this expectation to make decorative work that looked ethnic. And I think I really wanted to move away from that and make big stuff and take up space. I don't think I would have used those words when I was a student. But I think it was something about feeling heard. I just felt like no one was really listening to me, not my teachers, not even my family, because I think even just being an artist in an Asian household is very, very challenging because, everyone wants their children to be doctors or lawyers or something practical. Being an artist is not practical, but I think that kind of just gave me the desire, and I guess with abstract work and kind of the interest in color, I sort of wanted to bring some of my voice into the world, but not make it all about me, open it up and connect, I think, with people. I think also with this idea of conceptual painting, I could make this. I've made kind of murals and public work all over the world, and even though we might speak different languages, I remember doing a project in China, and it was almost like I needed two interpreters because it was quite complicated. Through the drawing, through the art, we had a universal language, and I think that's what I'm into.
How do you maintain, I guess, that relationship with the material or the image when you're working in such large scales?
I guess you have a vision. You do things in the workshop and the studio, like sampling, testing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's a process where you can't control everything. But there's an interesting story about Christopher Wren, who's a British English architect who built St. Paul's Cathedral. And when he started making it, he had a vision. And then through the process of making it, the commissioners didn't like what he did originally, but through his ingenious way of people-pleasing, he eventually got it to what he wanted it to be. So I think not only is it manipulating materials and talking to fabricators, no, I want it like this, not like that. A lot of it is kind of a social, I don't know, yeah. Working with people to get them on your side and for them to understand how you think about materials. And that's it's very abstract, very difficult to describe. You could get a particular description on paper, on a blueprint, but you can't really get it until you're there and having that one-to-one conversation with him. But you'll never get it as I would paint it. So I think that's why I also need the studio time, Sinta painting, but also the sort of outside of the studio public art and kind of with other people.
Thank you. I think we don't have much time left, so I wanted to end with one very simple question for each of you, which is, I think, what is the thing that you maybe love the most about the material you work with? And I know some of you work with multiple materials, so pick one, and then pick the one thing that you love the most about the material or the way that you work with the material.
Okay, I'll start then. Well, even though I'm presenting ceramics at the moment, actually my current favorite, like current, it can change of course, is actually ash painting at the moment that I'm making, because it's such a, the this one's, it's because it's such a material that is so hard to work with actually, because when I paint it, it immediately dries up. So then I have to work fast, but also I also work quite slow because I'm quite gentle with it. Because if you work too fast, you'll break it. If you work slow enough, you have the right rhythm and the right texture to create. And the colors that I use are very limited because I have to kind of make my own colors, and they're all very muted, these kind of ashy colors. So I would say ash because it's temporal and ephemeral.
I'm tempted to be annoying and say color because that's a material. But
I was
okay,
going to say
I'll-
colour too.
but if I have to use, I have to. Okay, fine. I'll say something else.
You can you can talk about color if you want.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah, color and perhaps and paper. But paper arguably isn't a material. It's like a form of material, like the line, because it's just like fibers sort of forming a plane. But my current interest is paper, because paper in a yarn form, which is what I've used here, it's got a very crisp, hard outline, which I find refreshing because everything that I've used prior to that was more fuzzy. And I think textile and textile construction techniques tend to give you a fuzzy everything, like literally, right? The material, and also textile construction techniques give you like, you're not gonna get like a razor sharp edge with textile, but there's something about paper and its crispness that's very alluring. It's got a softness, but it's hard edged. It can be pliable, but it also has its own spring. It's difficult to work with, but I think that's why it's alluring. Yeah.
So I'm going to say colour too, Tiffany. Same as you, because colour is fluid in terms of, well, I call myself a painter, but I use colour, I'm interested in the materiality of paint and the colour of paint, and I'm not using it in a pictorial way like most painters. I'm not really interested in shadow or like tone. I'm interested in the kind of, like if you had colour, if you cut it, if you collaged it, this is what I'm trying to produce. Also, I just love how colour on paint could be, I mean, even like industrial paint compared to colour on tempera paint. They're totally different, but yeah, it's, you know, that's the thing that I think I'm interested in. You know, how do I make a public artwork still feel like a Sinta Tantra painting, even if it's on this scale and using industrialized paints, even though other people are making it? And I think the link is color, and just making, like, ensuring that the color works on every scale and whatever material I use.
All right. Thank you so much to our speakers. As I said earlier, we have no Q&A, so you can approach them after the talk. Yeah, thank you so much for staying and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you.